Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
This is Parasha Nitzavim, and we are going to jump right in. This Parsha is most often right before the high holiday. Sometimes it's paired with Vayelech, so sometimes you'll hear Parsha Nitzavim Vayelech. It's all because we're trying to get to, obviously, Breshit for after Simchat Torah, well, on and after Simchat Torah. So we need to, in some years, kind of catch ourselves up. This is not one of those years, so we are just looking at Nitzavim. And I will let Rabbi Shapiro kick us off with a little intro to the Parsha and tell us which verses we are focused on.
Chapter 30 of Devarim. As is often the case when we find ourselves at the end of a chapter, which is where we will be, I'll just do a quick scan through most of this. I was saying to Rabbi Schatz earlier this week, it's getting a little repetitive at this point, right? Deuteronomy, Moses on his way out is really hammering his points home. So much of what you see in this parak is stuff you've been hearing pretty consistently over these past number of weeks. So when these things befall you, the blessing and the curse that I've said before, you have heard about blessing and curse. Spoiler alert, we'll be talking about that a little bit today. And you return to the Lord your God, and you and your children listen to God's command. Then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and take you back in love. I will just add very briefly, it's interesting that even in Moses' farewell speech, he's saying, I know you're not really going to listen to me, but there will be a time when you return, which, as Rabbi Schatz sort of mentioned a moment ago, tis the season, as it were, to be thinking about returning. Verse 4, even if you're at the ends of the earth, God will gather you up and bring you back into the land. Verse 6 was almost what we talked about. Rabbi Schatz liked it. Then the Lord your God will open up your heart and the hearts of your offspring to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul so that you may live. We're going to be touching on that concept a bit today as well. God's going to not be so happy with your enemies. We've been hearing a bit about that pretty consistently. You will get prosperity in all your undertakings, since you will be listening to God. So all of that is fairly standard order Deuteronomy stuff at this point. Rabbi Schatz, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Unfair to say? Well, whether or not it's fair, I already said. Okay. You might recognize these couple of verses coming up here. Surely this instruction, which I enjoin upon you this day, is not too baffling to you, nor is it beyond reach. Lo bashamayim hi, every conservative rabbinical student's favorite verse right here.
Also Alan Broidy's favorite Torah, and the reason I know that is because I taught, and Larry Herman's maybe, okay. Because I taught it last year for Shabbat Mincha. Why I was on for Shabbat Mincha right before Rosh Hashanah, I don't know. And
because you're everyone's favorite rabbi.
No one else chooses to be on except for myself. But they were talking about how this really has been like a verse that they've lived their lives by. And I think that I know that it is not Rabbi Shapiro's favorite verse, but I know that for a lot of people, they feel this way, that this really informed and defines a lot of how we practice conservative Judaism. What?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's like how Bob Dylan doesn't want to play "Blowing in the Wind" in concert. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, it's a wonderful song. It's a powerful song.
I just didn't want to dismiss something that's like, it's still important, I think. It just doesn't need to be discussed today.
I agree with Rabbi Schatz, everyone's favorite rabbi. Yes, lo bashamayim hi, this idea, and then just to pull it apart 10 seconds more, this idea that Torah should be accessible to you in wherever you are now, right? It should not be up in the heavens, that you should say, who among us can go up and get it? The next verse, neither is it beyond the sea, that you should say, who of us can cross the other side of the sea? Verse 14, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od. Rather, the thing is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to observe it.
This is the other verse I wanted to do.
Okay. So if I wasn't here, Rabbi Schatz would be doing Rabbi Schatz. If you lived here, you'd be home by now. If I wasn't here, Rabbi Schatz would already be talking about the Parsha in greater depth and meaning. It's very close to you, right? This idea that Torah shouldn't be distant. Okay, getting closer to what we are going to be diving into. This idea that what is being set before you is life and good, or death and evil, right? This is also an idea in terms of the choice that we collectively and we as individuals are making based on what Moses is holding out to us. We are being commanded, love God, walk in his ways, keep his commandments, his laws, and his rules. But if your heart turns away, you shall certainly perish, right? Again, this very Deuteronomic idea of blessing and curse, of this is what you're supposed to do. If you do it, great, there will be a reward. If you don't do it, not so great, there will be consequences. Bringing us to the two verses at long last, yea, verily, that we are going to be exploring in greater depth today, verses 19 and 20 out of Deuteronomy chapter 30. Ha'idoti bachem hayom et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. I call heaven and earth to witness against you. I don't like that preposition there. I call heaven and earth to witness upon you this day. Hachayim v'hamavet natati lefanecha. I placed before you life and death, habracha v'haklala, blessing and curse. Uvacharta b'chayim, and you should choose life. Lama'an tichya ata v'zarecha, so that you and your offspring should live. La'ahava et Adonai Elohecha, to love the Lord your God. Lishmoa bekolo uldavkabo, to listen to God's voice and to hold fast to him. Is it translated here? I think that's pretty good, actually. Kihu chayecha ve'orech yamecha, for God is your life and your length of days. Al ha'adama asher nishba Adonai la'avotecha, l'Avraham li'Yitzchak u'Yaakov latet lahem, that to dwell upon the land that God has promised to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them. That's what we're looking at.
That's what we're looking at.
That was my segue. That was my toss over to you, Rabbi Schatz, back in our AccuParsha forecast newsroom.
Okay. Can you somehow make it so that the screen shows all of the verses that we're talking about?
It doesn't? What can you see?
Aren't we we're only looking at 19 and 20? Okay. That's right. I knew that. Because, okay. Can you make it a little bit bigger then? I didn't look at 18. So we're all...
Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
There's a few things going on.
You may be everyone's favorite rabbi. However...
Watch it. Okay. Kushiot on... As Rabbi Shapiro said, these are the last two verses of this Parsha. And interestingly, as I mentioned before, sometimes these aren't the last two verses, right? Sometimes these go straight in. They're always the last two verses of the Parsha, but sometimes they're not the last two verses that we read. Sometimes we go straight into the next Parsha. So you're welcome to think of it as final, or welcome to think of it as kind of a continuation into something else. But any questions, any thoughts on these two verses here? I can't see everybody, so let me make everybody. Okay, Denise, yeah, go ahead.
So I only discovered this as an adult. Like I was at a class and the rabbi said, that there's this thing in the Torah about I place before you life and death and I command you to choose life. And I was blown away. I just thought it was so beautiful and so relevant, and it was just amazing to me. So.
Oh, great. Wonderful.
That's not really a kushia in there other than just wow.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It is a really interesting, as we get further in the Torah, kushia becomes a very flexible term. But this is a concept that comes up. We actually talked about it 4 weeks ago. Time is a crazy thing right now. I'm not really sure, but a few parshiot ago.
Joanna would remember. Joanna's good at that.
It comes up in Re'eh a little bit, but not exactly like this.
Correct. Exactly. I was just trying to do the math in my head as to when Re'eh was, but that's exactly what I was getting at, which is we see this idea of putting blessing and curse against one another in a few different areas, but very specifically kind of over and over again in terms of Moshe's recounting of what's going on, which is really interesting. And I guess not so surprising when we think of our lives also, right? The ways in which we can compartmentalize things that were really great and things that we could have maybe made better decisions about or just weren't so great for whatever reason. So yes, I agree with your astonishment with this idea. It is one that is quite awesome in all the ways that awesome is defined. Ilan, Marlise, Karen.
So two things. In verse 19, I think it is a very powerful expression of free will. And the fact that you as an individual have agency in your own future, right? And that don't rely on God to kind of just lead you there. You must choose life, right? So to me, that's very powerful. And in verse 20, what's powerful is a recognition of human nature. And what is that? Which is, it doesn't say you shall, by loving the Lord your God, heeding his commandments and holding fast to him, because this is the right thing to do. It is actually a realization and an acknowledgement that really the only way to get people to do something is if it's something in it for them, right? And it says that, okay, if you do this, here is the reward. You shall have life and you shall long endure upon the soil, right? So it's definitely a recognition of human nature.
Great. Beautiful. Those were two things that I also noticed in looking at these verses. And I love that they're right before Rosh Hashanah, because so much of this season is us thinking about the fragility of life and also what role we play in it. And for those of us who believe that there is also a higher power in terms of our lives and the things that happen in our life, free will or not, but just, the connection to a divine creator, how that plays into these two pieces as well, right? I totally agree with you in terms of the free will piece in the first verse. But this idea, similar to the second paragraph of the Shema, that if you do certain things, you get certain things in your life as well, which again, I think just plays very nicely with the themes of the high holidays. Karen put her hand down, so Marlise and then Renee.
I'm partly thinking about it because of some of the other verses that came before for it, but in terms of, blessing and curse at least, and what can bring life or death. Is it all just total opposites, binary choice? Is there any kind of nuance or more complexity to it?
Yeah. Why is it also black and white, right? Like what's the in between, or what's the nuance to these different pieces? I think, it's interesting. The Torah is so categorical usually, right? There really isn't so much nuance until we get into like building the Mishkan, where it's very specific as to what you need and what it's supposed to look like and all of that. But even there, that's not nuance, right? It's still definitive, but it's still painting by numbers, right? It's still telling you exactly what needs to look like where. Interesting point, especially based on, as you said, the other verses that we were talking about, even leading up to this one. Great. Renee, Karen, Rebecca.
I can do this. I'm on my phone. Can you hear me? Okay, so I think it's interesting that the first one to me, it basically says you should choose life over death. Uh-huh. It's black and white. It's very similar to what I think Elon was saying. And the second one is, it seems to me like there's more of a telling us that we need to follow the commandments, and there's more of a structure that we have to do certain things in order for us to have that long life.
Say a little bit more about that. What do you mean?
Well, we have to follow his commandments and we have to honor Hashem. And by doing those things, we'll have a long life. Whereas in the first one, it's just saying you can pick life or you cannot pick life, but I want you to pick life.
Got it. So there's reason.
But it didn't seem like there's a criteria for it so much in the first one. And then the second one, there's a criteria. In order to select it, we have to do certain things.
Yeah. So that kind of goes back to what Elon was saying with a different goal a little bit, right? That in the first one, there's free will. And so you get to choose whether or not it is, you're choosing life or you're choosing death. But then as you're pointing out in the second verse here, in verse 20, it's very clear that God wants us to choose life, right? Wants us to choose one or the other. And for all of these reasons, but I'll just push you a little bit in terms of thinking about how, yes, wants us to choose life, but doesn't necessarily give us our own, authority as to how. Rather, here are the ways to be connected to me, and then it will be good for you, right? God's commandments are holding fast to God. And that to me is especially interesting when we don't have an anthropomorphized God in front of us anymore. Now it's this idea of a spiritual God, who very much has relationship with people, but not in the same kind of.
But it's also his choice, especially during the Chagim. It's like, on Rosh Hashanah, it's already decided whether we're going to live or die, and our fate is sealed on Yom Kippur. So it's almost ironic that he's telling us in the first verse to choose life when, okay, I may say I want to choose life, but if it's my time and Hashem has decided it's my time, it doesn't matter whether I choose life.
So that is definitely a theology that some people ascribe to. And I think that there are other people who would say, even if God thinks that, or even if I believe that God is all knowing in terms of my time and how things will work, in terms of free will, right? And in terms of the way that I lead, not I, Rebecca, but, a person leads their life, that we should have control over how we care for our bodies, how we care for our planet, how we care for our community, which allows us to live longer or allows us to feel as though we have at least some agency over that choosing of life, instead of death. But you are pointing out a theology that is not foreign to us, and definitely we will say lots of prayers around in the coming few weeks. Okay, and now I don't remember the order. Karen, Rebecca, Denise.
So, and you froze, so it wasn't that I took my hand down right in the middle of what Elon was saying. But anyway, I'm thinking, what about suicide? So you can't do suicide, right? And even if I live a monk's life, I could get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could get, and die, even though.
Yeah. So
I'm having a lot of questions here about, okay, so if I'm really godlike and mitzvah and Starbucks cards and whatever else I do, that's not going to necessarily prevent harm.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we just lived a week where there were many natural disasters, and that is not something that anybody could have prevented. Now, someone could argue with me and say, well, if we took better care of our planet years ago, then we would have been able to prevent. I mean, there's always ways of arguing those types of what if situations. But yeah, of course, in terms of cancer, right? I remember when my uncle was diagnosed with cancer, he himself was a cancer researcher. So, the irony in him knowing much more about what was happening to him than I did, he would be the first person to say, like, you have good cells and you have bad cells. And sometimes your bad cells just win and your good cells don't know how to fight them. And that's science, right?
Okay. And what about suicide in Judaism?
Yeah, so Rabbi Shapiro probably knows much more about this than I do in terms of his mental health work. But one thing I can say, unfortunately, from experience of suicide in circles of my life, dying by suicide is something that we in Judaism, do not see as a way out, right? We don't, many people ask, can someone who dies by suicide be buried in a Jewish cemetery? The answer is yes. But because we believe that our bodies do not belong to, that our bodies belong to us, but that our souls belong to God, how are we taking care of something that's not actually ours? It's on loan to us. So a much bigger conversation for another time, I'm sure that Rabbi Shapiro will go into. Probably not today, but he's making faces at me and sending me text messages that he's not going to be doing this today. So, but that in general, that is something that is brought up in terms of how we as Jews think about living versus dying, versus taking our lives. Okay, Rebecca and then Denise.
So I have one kushiyah, but I also wanted to say what I thought about this, the duality here. And so for me, it's very difficult to see pain and movet, life and death as part of the black and white, good and evil, but more as so I don't know if I choose to interpret this or I understand it more as while you're alive, you're choosing to live your life in a life-affirming way rather than a negative way. Yeah. And I see that in that it's in the second line that it's saying that that is your life, the loving of God and listening to their commandments. The kushiyah the thing that struck me was the use of the words ha'idoti or the witnessing, and I don't understand quite if what is happening here is that the earth and sky will be the witnesses of what you choose to do, or the earth and sky are witnesses that I have given you the choice. And I'm curious what the role of them is in this kind of.
It's a beautiful kushiyah. I don't know that I have a great answer. I think it's a very powerful word, and especially again with the season that's coming up, right? What does it mean to be witness to something? And then in this particular passage, we're not talking about people being witness, but just like your surroundings and nature. So does that mean that God is witness, right? Is God calling God to witness? Is God saying that everywhere you are somehow being witnessed by that which is around you? So be aware of your surroundings. It's a really great question. And as we know in Judaism, witnesses are held to a very high standard, right? Whether it's when we're talking about kol nidre and we have people come up and become a beit din for our nidarim, for our vows, or at a wedding or at a get ceremony, right? Witnesses are super important to how we move from one stage of life to the next. So a really, really great question. And I'll just point, and maybe you said this and I just didn't hear you, also point us to the word nishba, right? Which means to vow or to take an oath, right? That's in the next verse also. So though it's not aid in the same kind of witness way, it also has this sound of justice and of upholding something to a higher standard. Denise, and then I will call on Rabbi Shapiro, who has gone away, but hopefully will come back.
So I felt like when I originally learned this verse and was blown away, and ever since, I took this in a much more micro way. I didn't take it as literally life and death, because for the most part, we don't have a lot of choice. I mean, we're born when we're born. And, even when somebody's, let's say, dying of a terminal disease, and maybe they go on hospice and they wind down a couple of days early, I mean, they're not really choosing life or death. It's like, you're going to die, and maybe you'll die today, maybe you'll die tomorrow or whatever. And so I saw it more as
You're still there? Did we lose you? You're back? Okay, Denise, we can't hear you any longer, so just maybe type it in the Okay. If you are still here, which doesn't look like you are actually, you're still talking. Okay, type it in the chat, Denise, because we can't hear you. So go ahead, because your internet is going in and out, so we can't understand what you're saying.
In a positive direction of good energy to toxic relationships and its job choices and it's those things. I don't know.
Okay. We got kind of everything you said really sped up, Denise. So if you want to just put it in the chat, I would love to be able to respond to it. It sounded like a really beautiful idea. But I definitely didn't get every word. So Rabbi Shapiro, over to you.
Is there a specific piece that you want to talk about in these verses?
I talked for about 15 minutes all by myself. So I think you should go in whatever direction you want, and I'm happy to pick up.
All right. Sure. I mean, I don't know. There was a lot said, but what?
You need me to go first?
I mean, just there was a lot said, but there was a lot that was like half responded to. So I don't know if I should go back to the Kushiot or if I should just dive into other stuff.
Whatever is good for you based on what you prepared is, I think, great for the class.
Thanks, Mom. I mean, Karen, you asked like a really big question that I want to make sure doesn't get skipped. I mean, my face was, Rabbi Schatz said, I'm sure Rabbi Shapiro will speak about this, but I hadn't planned to. But I'll just say that my understanding, what?
I didn't mean today. I just meant in general that you probably have more to say on the topic than I do.
Just to say briefly that my understanding is that for people who die by suicide, that it's very much considered to be a part of mental illness, right? That it's someone who is sick and that it is not seen in the same category as someone who, takes a life in another form. And the idea that someone who dies by suicide would therefore not be buried in a Jewish cemetery is incorrect from everything I've seen. So I just think it's important to name that. I'll offer up one piece that I was happy to see sort of a riff on from verse 19 and then one or two pieces from verse 20. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of back and forth, and rightly so, about like this question of how literally should or shouldn't we take this idea of choosing life or death, right? And I think good points have been made that like there is of course stuff that comes up that we don't have control over, and I think, Denise, part of what you were indicating is that it's not necessarily the same thing as like it is totally within your hands whether you live or die, but when there are choices laid out before you, make the good choice, right? This idea that in every single moment we have a choice to make about how we're going to conduct ourselves, and hopefully, Moses is saying, I've been yelling at you for the past 30-ish chapters or so, and hopefully you're getting the memo by now that here are what the good choices are, and I really hope you choose those. Rebecca, to your just to briefly hop over to your kushya about heaven and earth, I saw a couple of commentators talk about the reason heaven and earth are named, that they should be witnesses to like what's being laid out here in terms of this sort of construct of what's happening, because they're eternal, right? As opposed to human witnesses that like, well, not be around after however many dozens of years after this, right? That because heaven and earth are eternal and this is an ongoing commitment process and so on, that's why heaven and earth are specifically named as the witnesses here, which I liked as a construct to be working with. And I also saw this verse anchor a couple of different references to this idea that I actually don't think I've spoken all that much about in this course, although I've talked about it elsewhere. And Pnei Halacha, which Rabbi Schatz who Rabbi Schatz has cited before, who talks about halachic ideas, but from kind of a philosophical perspective, not just in the sense of like, here's what you should do or here's what you should not do, although that would be appropriate given the topic. But he anchors an idea that's core to a lot of rabbinic thought in this verse. He talks about how this is a verse where we can see the idea of the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, the inclination towards good and the inclination towards evil. This idea in rabbinic thought that everybody has both of those, right? That every single person has the inclination to pull us to the good choice, and every single person has the inclination to the not so good choice. And that, again, by this binary that, yeah, like I think a couple of people have referenced, is fairly stark in this verse. This recognition that we each have those, and this idea that then we have the challenge, opportunity, invitation to choose in each moment which one of those inclinations we are going to pursue. I really like that idea. I always find that to be a meaningful and compelling idea. So it just always makes me smile when it pops up somewhere. So I just wanted to offer that up because I don't think we have talked about it all that much in the past couple of weeks or months or years. How long have we been doing this for? I don't know. I've lost track. I had more on verse 20, Rabbi Schatz. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to share off of verse 19, but there was that concept that bubbled up, and I wanted to make sure to nod to that and offer that up.
Yeah, sure. Unless people have comments on or anything to say about what the offered, does anybody want to say anything to it? No? Okay. I'm going to share my screen because, well, nothing if not consistent. So this is a Sforno piece that I found quite compelling. One of the things for me that and this comes up again, I think I referenced this earlier, just this idea that what does it mean for this to be so broad, right? We're all individual people. And so how could it be that something is written kind of so broadly for an entire people, and yet there are individuals that make up this entire whole? You will hear more about that in my Rosh Hashanah sermon. So it's possible that's why this struck me. So it says,
or was that your whole Rosh Hashanah sermon?
People are going to appreciate that it's not 30 minutes. Let me just tell you. Okay.
Mine's 46 minutes.
I'm not coming. That's too long. Okay.
45.
It's terrible. So that both you and your offspring will experience this life, right? It's not just about you, but it's about who comes after you. When I said choose life, I did not mean that you should keep the laws for the sake of the reward in store for you, right? So I'm not just saying you should have life because there are lots of things that I think you should be doing, I being God, because I think they're going to be good for you, but that you should make this choice for the sake of true life. That you should experience your life in the way that is going to be good for your existence, for your life. So if lighting, this is not what Sforno says, but if lighting Shabbat candles is meaningful to you, great, because that also works with something that I think will be meaningful to you. But if that's not meaningful to you, I hope that God, hope that there are other things that you are doing that define your life in such a way that still means you're choosing life as a way of being connected to God and to Torah. This alone is sufficient, I think it's supposed to say, a sufficient reason to choose this option. Whatever satisfaction you experience during life on earth should be with a view to the kind of life in store for you after your body has died. That's a very interesting concept in terms of the world to come. I wouldn't say that I wholeheartedly believe in that or focus on that too much in my own existence, but interesting that you would want to experience a type of life that you're proud of, right? If there is a type of existence in the world to come, I think is a fascinating point. So the Orach Chaim, and then I think this is all I have on 19. So I'll just share these two pieces, and then if Rabbi Shapiro wants to move on, or if people have comments, we can. So the Orach Chaim says there are two more choices which pertain to the hereafter, meaning the world to come. Moses calls them bracha and klala, respectively blessing or curse. We talked about this a little bit earlier when we could hear Denise. These are not immediate choices, or better, the results of such choices will not become known immediately. The whole approach is similar to what we have in Deuteronomy 28:6, which is a little bit earlier on in our Torah. You are blessed at your arrival. This was the verse I wanted to do last week. You are blessed at your arrival in this world. They're adding in the piece in this world, and you are blessed at your departure. So the verse is, I forget how it starts. But anyway, it doesn't have in this world and it doesn't have from this world. Those are being added in here by the Orach Chaim. As you enter this world without sin, so you will leave it without sin. It's saying that is something from the Gemara. Moses had to separate these two paragraphs from one another in order for us to appreciate that he talks about different domains in each paragraph. So the thing that I like about this particular commentary that seems to be a little bit all over the place is that it's comparing us to this verse in 28:6, which I will show you because it's driving me nuts that I can't quote it for you. And the fact that it's not just about the moment that you are in, but every moment of blessing that can be in your comings and in your goings, right? It's not just your life in its entirety, but it's in every step of your life. Baruch ata bevoecha ubaruch ata betzetecha. Blessed should you be in your comings and blessed should you be in your goings. So I just like that it is less general, I will say, than just saying your life should be a blessing or life should be about choosing between blessing and curses, but rather that every moment should be a choice between whether you are finding in this moment blessing or finding in this moment something that has complication and therefore we might define as curse. That's all I have on 19. Rabbi Shapiro.
I was offering a meaningful pause for folks to respond if they like.
Yeah,
like Elon.
So I want to talk about Sforno's interpretation because he actually brings out an inherent problem with verse 20, which is if in fact the reason to follow God's commandments is that you will get these rewards, and the rewards that are talked about in verse 20 are actually rewards in this world. What happens if your life sucks, right? You're poor, you're oppressed, you have cancer, you have all these things, and then you say, well, wait a second, I've been doing all this and my life still sucks. Where's the that's a crappy deal. Sforno says, no. Actually, whatever satisfaction you experience during life on earth should be with a view to the kind of life in store for you after your body has died. That's the payoff, So if your life sucks, don't worry about it. Which I guess is a way to deal with that problem, because I'm sure people read that and if things are not going well for you, that's a very hard verse to grasp without this kind of an interpretation.
Totally. And it's a really hard theology. There's a part of Gemara. You know what I'm talking about, Rabbi Shapiro? Which piece of Gemara am I going to reference? Go ahead. Okay. Rabbi Shapiro left instead of answering. There's a piece of Gemara that talks about exactly that if you have a good life in this world, that you will have a harder life in the world to come, and vice versa. If you're having a lot of struggles in this world, that you'll have a beautiful life in the world to come. As I said, when I read that line in the commentary, I disagree with it completely. And of course, when people are going through lots of tsuris, you don't want to say, well, it's going to be fine for you in the world to come. You want it to get better for them in the world that they're living in right now. So yeah, I think that everything that you're pointing to is just a very difficult theology, and one that leads us to think that not every person who is observant or extremely spiritually connected or follows every mitzvah, that's written out for us in the Torah, that they're going to have the perfect life. And yet, as you pointed out, there are people for whom when something bad happens to them, they turn to religion, whether it's ours or another one, to find that element of maybe if I do more of this, maybe if I find that spiritual connection more, show that I can be more attentive to that piece of my identity, that things will be better for me. And as we all know, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work. And it probably has nothing to do with the fact that you're believing more or doing more or experiencing more. It probably just has to do with your situation and how it ends up working out in your life.
But the idea of an afterlife, I mean, part of the reason those ideas exist is to try to answer that question, right? Like, how could it be? How could it be that things are still so bad for me when I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing? It might not work for people. It might be an insufficient answer, but I do think that is part of where the ideas of reward in the world to come do emerge from. This thorny question, Elon, that you're asking of, well, if I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do and my life still sucks, what's the deal with that? And an answer is there's Olam Haba. Right? There's Olam Haba, and you will receive reward for what you've done, even if it doesn't seem like you're getting it right now. It might not work, but as a response, but I do think that's part of where that idea comes from.
Yeah, totally. The thing that I was trying to get Rabbi Shapiro to say is something called Isurim Shel Ahava. This idea that that theology that if something bad is happening to you in this life, that you will have it good in the world to come, which is a very difficult theology. Renee.
So I was going to say the same thing that you did. And because it dawned on me when my brother was sick with cancer, people were saying to me, oh, it's going to be okay because he's suffering here. So he's going to not suffer in the world to come. And he's going to be able to walk and he's not going to feel pain. He's not going to this and he's not going to that. I'm like, screw that. I want him to not suffer here. How is it going to help me? What's going to be in Olam Haba? I need him here with me.
Yeah. Yep. So. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We brought that up a lot, not your particular story. We brought up that idea a lot in this class. And I think that it is a difficult theology, but one that shows its head in a lot of different places in our tradition. Rabbi Shapiro, we have 7 minutes left, so I would love for you to be able to share something else if you wish, and then if there's time, I can share something else, but we can move on.
Do I have time to share something else? Something else's?
You have 7 minutes.
Two other things. Great. Thing one and thing two. Thing one that I noticed that popped up in a couple of places is this idea that when it says in verse 20 about why you should do what you're supposed to do, multiple sources cited that as how you shouldn't study Torah for the sake of personal gain, which is a consistent thread throughout rabbinic literature, that because it says to love God, to listen to God's voice, and to cleave to him, in the Talmud, it continues to say, the verse indicates that a person should not say, I will read the written Torah so that they will call me a sage. I will study the Mishnah so that they will call me rabbi. I will review my studies so that I will sit in the academy, right? This idea that you're not supposed to learn for the sake of personal gain or prestige.
You could be called rabbi.
What?
You didn't study Mishnah so you could be called rabbi.
Huh? You cut out. What'd you say?
Go ahead. Doesn't matter. It was a joke.
Oh, okay. And it also pops up elsewhere saying that like it's specifically not for like personal financial gain. So I just think it's a nice reflection of this idea about what this is all really for, and also a nice problematization of what those of us who rabbi for a living, which was not the case for the majority of Jewish civilization, sort of grapple with, right? Like, Rashi was a vintner, Rambam was a doctor, and in all their free time, they also became like, all-time great rabbis. I certainly don't feel like I have time for a medical practice. I think Rabbi Schatz might have time to grow some grapes in her backyard. But it's just also whenever I see text like that, it raises that question in an interesting way for me. So I wanted to toss that out there. The one other piece I saw that I thought was really nice that takes this in a slightly different direction in terms of this idea about why we do it and how it extends our lives and whether it's this world or the world to come, is that Reb Simcha Bunim, who's one of the great Hasidic sages, Reb Simcha Bunim of Pesischa, which is easy for me to say. He plays with this idea of how it says Chayecha ve'orech yamecha, that Torah should be your life and extending of your days. And he starts with a parable because, of course, and he said, sometimes there's a medicine that tastes bad, but it's good for you. And sometimes there are things that taste really, really good, but they're actually bad for you. But Torah is like neither of those. It tastes good and it extends your life, right? That it's chayecha, that it's good for you, that it's enjoyable right now. And it also, right, is good for you in the long term. So I just thought that was a really nice sort of exposition of, of a phrase that folks might recognize. Ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu. Right, Rabbi Schatz? I sang. I wanted to make sure I got a little bit of singing in on the last podcast of the year. But I like that idea that sort of within that little turn of phrase is this idea that it is whatever you might get out of it, if you're doing it for sort of the right reasons, that there can be something in Torah that is both positive or pleasurable or meaningful both in this moment and also something that pays off or is sustaining or holds value in the long term as well. So I thought that was a really nice idea.
I want to add to the first thing that you said with a Likutei Moharan text.
Good. Very good.
I know you're always surprised when I find myself deep in Chassidut. Would you consider this Chassidut? It is Chassidut, right?
Reb Nachman? Yes, I would consider Reb Nachman to be Chassidut. Yes, I definitely would.
We can go through this another time. So,
You over Reb Nachman another time?
No. Okay. So here is a piece this is from Sforno again. A lot of Sforno today. Sforno says, Ladavka bo means that all of your activities during life on earth should be focused on giving glory to God. So that which I actually really like. I love the idea that you don't have to do like these specific mitzvot, but that everything that you do, my parents, I was going to say used to say, but they still say it, that you are a reflection of your name, right? If I walk out into the world and my last name is Schatz, people don't just see me as Rebecca Schatz, but they also think about all the other people they know with the last name of Schatz, right? Anything that I do is a reflection of my parents. Anything my parents do is a reflection on me. If you know that I'm related to the Good Glicks, you also know that anything I do is a reflection on them. Anything we do ripples out, right, to those who we are connected to. And I love this idea that to connect to God doesn't just mean to do the things that God might be asking of us or saying are good for us to do, but rather that everything that we experience in the world is somehow connected to feeling like we are doing that in relationship with God, which I really love. And so this piece brings that a little bit more specifically to Torah and says, I'm not reading the whole thing, how is it possible to separate oneself from the Torah even for a short while? In fact, it is unavoidable. It is impossible to be constantly attached to the Torah day and night without a moment's interruption. Every Torah devotee, including the scholar who studies Talmud and its commentators, which is like a little bit of a dig, but sure, and the like, each one commiserate with his level according to the subject matter he studies, must absent himself from the Torah for some time during the day. So you cannot constantly be enthralled in or studying the Torah every single minute of every day. Why? Because you need to also experience life and how the Torah that you're learning is also going to influence the life that you're living and vice versa, how the life that you're living is going to allow you to read the Torah differently and influence that piece, that Torah. The same is true also of one with deep mystical insight. Here you go, Rabbi Shapiro. And also of one who is much more loftier. Not sure what that means. Even so, he must interrupt and set aside his perceiving for a while, because it is impossible to continuously cleave to Torah or mystical perception without interruption. So I really like this piece for a few reasons. Number one, because I think it allows all of us to not feel inadequate with however we are doing Judaism and the amount of Judaism we do, that anything we are doing, as long as it is with good intention, is the correct amount, right? Because it's the amount for us and it is the way that we are cleaving to our tradition. The season that we are about to be in is where people feel the most judgmental of their own spiritual connection and their own attention to Jewish ritual, right? People feel, I have to fast or else I'm not a good Jew, or I have to be in shul from the moment that Psuke starts, no one ever does that, to the moment that Musaf ends, or else I haven't heard everything, right? And people only feel that way. I shouldn't say it so generally. Most people feel that way about this time of year and don't feel that way about like every Shabbat, right? They feel like, I can take a Shabbat off, I can take a nap. But Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, even Sukkot through Simchat Torah, I think people feel this real desire that like the right thing to do is to be in shul, to hear the liturgy a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. And I really like this piece because what it's basically saying is it's not important for you to do each and every little thing. It's important for anything that you do to have meaning. And so I just wanted to say, based on these verses, that I hope that you find meaning these high holidays, whether that's going to be with us every minute of the Chagim, which we would love, or whether that means you doing certain things that bring you that connection, that are not sitting in a pew for 4 hours every day of the high holidays. I think it's, to go back to the jokes that we were making about sermons earlier, it's all about the meaning that you're finding and the experience that you're having. It doesn't have to be a certain way or a certain sound or a certain seat. It has to be however you're finding connection. So that's my blessing for all of us, that we're able to find our connection this year in a way that's meaningful, because that will be enough. Rabbi Shapiro?
Ayenu.
Oh.
Amen.
Okay. Any last thoughts, comments?
Shana Tova. Shabbat Shalom. L'chaim.
All the things. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Shana Tova. And again, we hope to see you over the course of really the next month. We will definitely see you next Friday for our podcast.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.